Hi, my name is Astrid, and this is how I signed a $500 million deal while my parents tried to erase me from my own legacy. We were flying over the Atlantic in opposite directions when it all came to a head. Them headed toward damage control, me sealing the kind of deal they once told me I'd never be smart enough to understand. The message came through as a push notification, sterile, succinct, and somehow colder than it needed to be. Mom, stay out of it, this is family business. No greeting, no context, no punctuation, not even a period at the end, as if even grammar was too much intimacy. It lit up my screen just as the ink dried on the last page of a global acquisition that had taken me 4 years to engineer. 4 years of silence, betrayal, humiliation, and planning. My hand trembled slightly as I passed the contract to my legal counsel. He was beaming, full of congratulatory energy, already calculating what this meant for our valuation. But I didn't meet his eyes. I stared out the private jet window, down at the silver-streaked clouds below, and let my expression settle into something still. "Everything all right?" he asked, reading the change in my posture the way a hawk reads wind. I nodded too quickly. "Yeah, family stuff." He didn't push. He never did. He knew, even if he didn't know. And right then, I didn't want to open that door. Because once I did, I'd have to walk back through all of it. Every splintered moment that led here. 2 years earlier, I stood in the middle of my cousin's engagement party, wearing a navy blue dress my mother had approved, because it made me look less aggressive. My heels pinched. My head throbbed from pretending to enjoy the soft jazz cover band. But nothing compared to the way her words cut clean across the clinking of wine glasses. "She's not a failure," my mother said, addressing my uncle, but tilting her voice loud enough for the room to hear. "She just doesn't know how to win properly. You don't just work hard, Astrid. You win strategically." Every word felt deliberate, sharp enough to gut, but soft enough to deny intent. That was her specialty. I froze mid-sip, lips barely grazing the rim of my glass. Every face nearby either looked down or looked away. No one, not even my younger brother, seated 2 chairs over, lifted a word in my defense. And I didn't expect them to. Family dinners had always been silent battlegrounds. In our house, the first one to flinch loses. It wasn't just humiliation, it was performance. My mother had a way of wrapping cruelty in velvet, making it look like wisdom. She called it sharpening me. I called it bleeding out in slow motion. I left early that night. No goodbyes, no explanations. Just a coat over my arm and the cool sting of December wind in my face as I walked to the parking garage alone. My father texted the next day. "Dad, you overreacted, again. You're lucky your mother even talks about you in front of investors." That was the moment I knew. I would never be the daughter they wanted, but I could be the ghost that haunted their empire. Back in the present, the plane hummed steadily toward New York as I scrolled through the rest of my mother's message thread. The full context became clearer. They were attempting to push a silent acquisition of a patent, my patent, filed under a shell corporation I had used during my NDA fallout years ago. They hadn't known it was mine. They still didn't. Not yet. That's the thing about raising a daughter like a pawn. One day, she learns how to become the queen without you noticing. They called it family business, but what they meant was ownership. Of me. My ideas. My labor. My silence. I leaned back in my seat and exhaled slowly, letting the rage simmer quietly. It wasn't hot anymore. It was cool. Focused. Clean. "Champagne, Ms. Vega?" the attendant asked. I smiled politely. "No, thank you, not today." Not when I was preparing for war. When I was 17, my father sat me down in his office, the one with the walnut shelves and the smell of cigars he never lit, and said, "You're very observant, Astrid. That's a rare quality. Great for support staff. Maybe one day you'll make a killer executive assistant." I remember laughing, waiting for the punchline, but there wasn't one. That was his version of encouragement. A woman's peak being proximity to power rather than holding it. That same year, I'd built my first prototype for a supply chain optimization algorithm. I'd written the whole damn thing in a week while sick with mono, but he wouldn't even look at it. He said I needed to focus on interpersonal development if I wanted to survive in the real world. What he really meant was, stop being smarter than the men in the room. A few weeks before this deal closed, I found out my parents were actively trying to buy up key shares of my silent partner's firm through a dummy investment fund. They hadn't spoken my name once, just referred to me as Party C. Not our daughter, not the founder. Just a variable in a spreadsheet, a piece of math. They were trying to erase me from a system I built with my own hands. But the beautiful part? They'd underestimated me so thoroughly, they didn't see the trap I'd already set. The acquisition they thought they were finalizing? I had buried a clause that would transfer majority voting rights back to the original creator upon hostile purchase. A clause they'd skimmed, assumed irrelevant. I had rewritten my own story into the fine print. And now they were signing away control to a daughter they'd trained to obey, and forgotten to fear. My phone buzzed again. Mom, if you go public with this, it'll hurt the whole family. Don't be dramatic. Dramatic. That word again. The sharp little dagger they always kept tucked in their voices. I stared at her message for a long moment, then typed, Me. I'm not dramatic. I'm deliberate. And hit send. No punctuation. Just like her. The jet began its descent. The skyline glittered in the distance, an electric pulse against the darkness. In that moment, I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. What I felt was ready. For the confrontation, for the unraveling, for the story no one would see coming, because they never imagined someone like me could write it. And for the first time in years, I wasn't scared of what came next. I used to think manipulation looked like shouting, slamming doors, screaming matches. But in my family, it came in the form of silk gloves and strategic silences. You didn't know you were bleeding until you realized they'd been slicing for years. The night after the engagement party, the one where my mother publicly rebranded me as a strategic failure, I drove home in silence. No music, just the hum of tires on wet asphalt and the dull roar of shame beating in my chest. I had planned to tell her about my funding round that night. I was days away from closing $4 million in seed capital. It would have been the proudest moment of my adult life. But that was before she used the word strategically like a noose. I didn't tell her. I didn't tell anyone. By the time I pulled into my apartment garage, the decision had already made itself. I was done chasing their praise. I would build without them, behind them, beneath their radar, just like I had learned to survive them. What I didn't know yet was that they had already started building their own story about me. One that would cost me everything. 3 weeks later, I received a letter from a law firm representing a private investor group. It looked like junk mail at first, but when I saw the name of the company, Thermexis Systems, my blood ran cold. That was my company, my idea, my proprietary logistics engine, my patent. Only it was no longer in my name. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Maybe my co-founder had restructured things for tax purposes. But after an hour on the phone with legal, the truth hit me like a cold slap. I had been signed out of my own IP. Legally, quietly. A transfer that took place via a board vote while I was hospitalized with pneumonia 3 months earlier. And the kicker? The outside investor, who had secured controlling interest. A holding firm chaired by my father. I stared at the paperwork until my vision blurred. The name Aster Dynamics printed on the top corner like a sick joke. A shadow company registered to a P.O. box in Delaware. He didn't even have the decency to hide it well. He thinks you don't know how to finish things, my mother once said. That's why he steps in. He's helping. No, this wasn't help. This was theft dressed as protection. I remember dialing his number with shaking hands. I didn't plan what I was going to say. I wanted to hear how he'd explain it, if he'd stutter, if he'd lie. He answered on the third ring. Astrid. You signed away my company, I said. No greeting, no preamble. He sighed. Not surprised, not guilty, just tired. Like I was an annoyance interrupting his Sunday golf routine. You weren't well, he said. The board needed stability. You mean control? You left your house unlocked, sweetheart. I just made sure the wrong people didn't walk in. The words dropped into silence. I heard birds in the background. Wind, a car door closing. I was in the hospital, I said quietly, and your team panicked. You didn't have a succession plan. That's a liability. My throat burned. So you became my plan. He didn't reply. He didn't need to. The silence was confirmation enough. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. But something in me cracked open. Not like glass, but like an old lock giving way. This wasn't about a patent. This was about erasure. I was being deleted by the people who built me. So I did the only thing that felt sane. I booked a ticket to San Francisco that same night. I told no one. I needed space to think, to plan, to unravel what had just happened without them watching. In the airport lounge, I wrote down every asset I still had. Contacts, code, cash reserves, goodwill. I outlined a plan to build something new, cleaner, better, something with no fingerprints but mine. Then I called Camille. Camille used to be my roommate in grad school, brilliant, soft-spoken, and one of the only people I'd ever trusted with my darkest thoughts. She was also a mother now, a single mom who had left her high-paying corporate job after being blacklisted for whistleblowing. We hadn't spoken in over a year, but when she picked up, I didn't need to explain much. I need a clean start, I said. How dirty are we talking? Everything. I need to build in the dark. There was a pause. Then a sigh. I'm in. Just like that. We worked out of a windowless basement office behind a laundromat in Berkeley. It smelled like detergent and dust. We called it the box. No one knew where we were. We used encrypted servers, burner phones, fake names. I let Camille handle all legal filings. She opened accounts under a female-led investment syndicate she quietly managed on the side. A group she had built with other women like her. Brilliant, burned, and done being polite. The first night we sat on the cold tile floor eating takeout, I looked at her and said, "Do you think I'm overreacting?" Camille didn't even blink. "No, I think they underestimated how far you'd go." Then she added with a smile, "Which is exactly why you're going to win." The twist came 2 months later. One of my father's companies was preparing to acquire a logistics tech startup in Austin. I recognized the name immediately. Sableflow. It had been my biggest competitor when I launched. And now it was collapsing under leadership issues. But what no one knew was that the Sableflow founder had reached out to me in confidence. She wanted to exit. Quietly, ethically, I saw the opening. Camille and I rerouted a portion of our funding pool to acquire Sableflow via a blind trust. We absorbed their tech, their contracts, their customer base, all before my father could finalize his move. By the time his team realized, the company was gone, dissolved and folded into a new shell entity. He called me again. "You're playing a dangerous game, Astrid." "No," I said. "I'm just playing better." It was 2:14 a.m. when Camille woke me up with a single word. "Logan." She didn't need to say anything else. I sat up, groggy, pulse climbing. The air in our basement office, our box, had gone stale after 12 hours of near silence. Code still blinked on 3 monitors in the corner. My sweatshirt clung to me with the kind of sweat only unresolved panic could bring. "You're sure?" I asked. She nodded, holding up her phone. Signature traces match. It's him, Logan Mathis, the man I'd once called partner, in business, and, for a short and humiliating season, in love. Also, the man who had been paid to infiltrate my original startup and quietly report every roadmap, vulnerability, and pitch deck back to my parents' office. A mole in designer shoes, Camille once called him. I hadn't said his name aloud in 18 months. I'd hoped never to again. "What's he doing?" I asked. Camille's voice was thin. Buying IP, under a new firm, targeting every logistics company you've ever spoken to. Of course. Of course he was. This wasn't just business. This was a culling. I had met Logan during the early build-out of Thermexis, when I was hungry, overworked, and a little too eager to believe in chemistry that came wrapped in business acumen. He was smooth, magnetic, carried the kind of confidence that made pitch rooms lean in. For 6 months, I thought I'd met the unicorn, a man who not only respected my vision, but added value to it. Until the night I found a memo on his desktop, a draft email addressed to my father, titled, Updates from the Inside. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream. I just left, moved out, cut him out of my company and my life. But he hadn't stopped watching me. Back in the present, Camille clicked through a database of transactions. I watched a sea of filings scroll across the screen. Small licensing deals, shell companies, patent options. Logan's new firm was called Kelton Core. It was clearly laundering money through layered ownership structures, all routed through a Cayman bank. This isn't just a grudge, Camille muttered. He's building a kill switch, one acquisition at a time. I stared at the screen. He's trying to recreate my original platform. She looked at me. Correction, he's trying to sell a bastardized version of it before you can launch yours. There it was. The play. The real reason he resurfaced. He wasn't just trying to erase me. He was trying to replace me. I leaned forward, hands on the desk. We need to get ahead of this. If he's targeting my former clients, it's only a matter of time before he flips one of my old investors. Camille gave me a long look. There's something else you should see. She pulled up a calendar invite. It was for a private gala in Manhattan, hosted by the Vega Family Foundation. I hadn't been invited. Not officially. Logan, however, was listed as a speaker. I exhaled. He's presenting on women in tech, isn't he? She didn't answer, just turned the screen toward me. There it was, in white font on a gold background. Keynote, Disruption and Diversity. Innovating with Empathy. Logan Mathis, co-founder, Kelton Core. My stomach turned. He's using my language. All of it, Camille said. Even your tagline. It was beyond insult. It was identity theft in designer packaging. I knew what had to happen next. I couldn't just fight back with code or contracts. This was reputation warfare, public perception, optics. He's going to beat me to market, I whispered, and he's going to wear my skin while doing it. Camille crossed her arms. Not if we detonate first. I raised an eyebrow. Detonate? She gave me a tight, dark smile. You wanted to build something clean, but now we clean after we burn. I didn't respond, but I didn't disagree. The week leading up to the gala, we prepared our counterstrike in secret. Camille drafted a press release, anonymous, but with enough breadcrumbs for the right people to connect the dots. We would leak the paper trail of Logan's IP purchases, his ghost signings, the non-competes he quietly violated. But the pièce de résistance would be a pitch deck, one that proved Kelton Core's tech was copied, line for line, from Thermexis's 2019 build. And that pitch deck? It was stored in a secure drive only I had access to. Logan had forgotten the one thing that always betrayed a thief: timestamps. The gala was a fog of glass, gold, and false laughter. I wore a black sheath dress and no expression. Camille walked a few paces behind, earpiece in, tracking Logan's movements like a hawk. The moment he stepped onto the stage, I felt my body still, like everything had narrowed. The lights, the music, the buzzing champagne flutes, into one singular sound: his voice. Technology doesn't just scale, Logan said, pausing for applause. It shapes culture, and culture, when elevated by empathy, becomes legacy. My jaw tensed. I had written those words years ago, in a blog post no one read, except him. The betrayal felt fresh all over again. At 8:37 p.m., Camille hit send on the leak. The email went out to Tech Digest, VentureWatch, and 4 key investors who had once backed Thermexis. The subject line was simple: Kelton Core. Built on a lie. By 9:15, the first murmurs began. Faces at the gala started checking phones. Logan's smile faltered, slightly, before he regained control. At 9:24, I slipped out. Not triumphant, just done. We didn't stay to watch the house burn. That's the thing about revenge. It works best when you leave before the fire starts catching breath. 3 days after the gala leak, Camille and I sat across from a fire pit on the roof of our temporary office in Brooklyn, a quiet glass building we'd secured under a nonprofit we didn't technically run. The skyline blinked around us like it didn't care what wars we'd started. She poured bourbon into 2 low glasses. They're panicking. Who? Logan, your father, the partners. They think you're going public. I thought we already did. Camille shook her head. You leaked the evidence. You haven't told your side. You've made them unstable, not obsolete. That word hung in the air. Obsolete. It wasn't just a power shift. It was an identity death. The worst kind. When someone realizes they can't kill you, so they try to make you irrelevant instead. That night, I received an email from an internal source at one of my father's subsidiaries. No name, just a subject line. FYI, they're moving against you. Attached was a PDF, 94 pages of internal meeting notes, budget memos, off-record minutes from Vega and Coer board sessions. In short, a strategy to discredit me as unstable, emotional, obsessed with control. They were preparing a full media strategy, a daughter gone rogue, framed as an emotional liability with a vendetta against her loving, misunderstood family. They would throw me under every bus they had access to. It wasn't just business anymore. It was personal propaganda. I stared at the document until my eyes stung. I couldn't sleep. I paced the apartment at 2 a.m., then walked to the roof again. Brooklyn was quiet. The sky was too clear for November. I hated how clean everything looked, like it hadn't been built by liars. My phone buzzed. It was my brother, Jace, 1:55 a.m. You really want this fight? I stared at the screen. Me. This is the fight. You're just late to it. The next day, Camille and I flew to Boston. Not for press, not for tech, but for a name. Thermexis had been funded through 6 angel investors. One of them, Eleanor Chu, a logistics legend and former mentor of my father, had ghosted me the minute things fell apart. I needed to know why. We met her in a private club downtown. She looked the same, silk scarf, no-nonsense glasses, fingers lined with emeralds she never explained. Why now? She asked before we even sat. Because I want the truth, I said. Why did you sell your stake in my company to a holding group you knew my father owned? Her lips thinned. You disappeared. I was in the hospital. No one told us that. They didn't have to. You had my number. Eleanor leaned back, measuring me. Your father said you asked him to step in. My throat closed. No, I said flatly. I begged him not to. There's a difference. She nodded slowly. I believe you now. Now. The cruelty of that word. How much it contained in so little space. Camille didn't speak until we were back on the train. She's not the enemy. No, I agreed. She's the mirror. All of them are. Reflections of how easily people rewrite truth when the narrative is profitable. The train rattled into motion. I felt something settle inside me. Not rage. Not yet. But resolve. I want to show them what happens when you bet against someone who remembers everything. Camille smiled. Then we'd better find the ledger. That ledger, the internal spreadsheet that detailed all Vega and Coy's personal transactions, was the holy grail. It proved every unethical fund transfer, every acquisition built on insider tips, every shell move tied to family privilege. And we found it. Buried on an offline drive belonging to a former assistant, an ex-employee. Quiet, bitter, brilliant. I was supposed to be CFO by now, she said when we met in a diner in Jersey. But your mom said I wasn't optics friendly. She slid the flash drive across the table. I kept a copy, just in case. What do you want in return? Camille asked. the woman didn't blink. Nothing. Just make it worth it. Inside that flash drive was every quiet theft my family had ever committed under the guise of stewardship. Money funneled from charities to family trusts. Donations repurposed to cover luxury expenses. Stocks gifted to anonymous advisors, who happened to be cousins. But the biggest twist? A line item titled Kelton Deal, Legal Purge Strategy. It was dated before Logan ever built his new firm. I read it 3 times before saying anything. They planned this, I whispered. My father paid Logan to betray me, before we even broke up. It was never real. Camille put her hand over mine. It's all real now. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I stared out the window of the train and imagined 1,000 versions of myself walking away from this, letting it go, forgiving it, calling it a hard lesson. But none of them were me anymore. They were ghosts, and I was done living like I was already dead. We went dark for the next 5 days. No phones, no social, no contact. Just planning. Paper trails, legal frameworks, NDA reviews, contracts redlined and scorched. We assembled a war chest, lawyers, whistleblowers, signed testimonies, coded archives. It was no longer a question of if we'd go public. It was how loudly. The invitation came in the form of a white envelope, wax-sealed, hand-delivered by courier. I didn't open it right away. I didn't need to. I already knew what it was. The Vega Foundation's annual Legacy Summit. Their crowning jewel. The one night a year where my parents strutted like benevolent monarchs, doling out scholarships and philanthropy contracts like confetti, while corporate sharks in tuxedos smiled for cameras and took careful notes. It was always a spectacle. But this year was different. Because this year, I would be there. The envelope sat unopened on Camille's desk as she leaned forward, elbows planted, eyes narrowed. "We're going in, right?" I didn't answer immediately. My pulse had already started its slow, familiar drumbeat. I knew this wasn't just about presence. It would be an execution. "Yes," I said finally, "but not as guests." Camille smirked. "As ghosts?" "As owners." We spent the next week preparing. Not just the legal documents, not just the public drop folders that would be set live the moment I stepped off stage, but something harder. Myself. Because I wasn't just walking into a ballroom, I was walking into my parents' curated narrative, one they had spent decades refining, and I was about to rewrite it. The Grand Solace Hotel looked like it always had, polished to the point of sterility, valets with white gloves, lighting designed to flatter, champagne passed around in flutes taller than my patience. I arrived alone. No Camille, no press, no entourage. Just me, in a tailored black jumpsuit and a pair of heels I hadn't worn since my first funding pitch 5 years ago. My mother was near the front when I walked in, dressed in emerald silk, greeting donors like a queen in exile. When she saw me, her smile didn't flicker, but her eyes did. "Astrid," she said as I approached, "how lovely you could make it. Unexpected." I returned the smile. "Good to see you too, Mother." My father appeared beside her like a summoned ghost, one hand resting on her elbow. "You look well?" he said carefully. I nodded. "I do." He waited, as if unsure whether I'd ask for approval or offer apology. I did neither. "I'm looking forward to the program," I said, and walked past them. The main ballroom was lit like an award show. Screens looped highlight reels of philanthropic efforts, scholarships, and charity expansions. In the middle of it all was the stage. My brother Jace stood near the wings, shifting nervously, whispering to someone in production. I hadn't seen him in months. He caught my eye across the crowd, and for a moment, something in his expression softened. I didn't smile back. He was still part of them, and I was here for what they had tried to bury. When the MC took the stage, everyone settled. "And now," she said, voice smooth with rehearsed delight, "a surprise addition to tonight's celebration. Please welcome someone who has redefined innovation, resilience, and impact. Astrid Vega." A hush swept through the room. My mother turned her head slowly. She hadn't known. Of course not. Camille had pulled strings through our nonprofit partner. I wasn't listed on any official program. As I stepped onto the stage, I saw the shimmer of confusion cross my father's face. Just for a second. The silence was surgical, no applause, just eyes, watching, waiting. I took the mic. Good evening. Some of you know me as the founder of Thermexis. Some of you knew me only as Robert and Eliza Vega's daughter. I let the pause breathe. But tonight, I'm here not as either of those people. I'm here as the ghost you all helped create. A rustle moved through the room like static. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small black folder. Inside this envelope is the full record of Vega & Co.'s internal transactions from the past 7 years. Illegal fund reallocations. Misrepresented donor intent. Insider information used to secure mergers and acquisitions. The projector lit up behind me. Page after page of records flashed across the screen. Numbers, names, timestamps. I turned slightly, facing the audience, but loud enough for my parents to hear. I was erased, not accidentally, not quietly, and not without consequence. People stood, phones came out, voices hissed. My father made a sharp movement toward the stage, but someone, Jace, maybe, held him back. I finished my speech in under 5 minutes. No theatrics, just facts. Then I stepped down. Backstage, Camille was waiting. You just cracked the glass, she whispered. No, I said. I threw the whole thing off the balcony. The fallout began before I even reached the lobby. Reporters were already calling. Former employees were reaching out. Lawyers we'd sent packages to weeks ago were suddenly available for meetings. But I didn't stop to celebrate. Because this wasn't the win, this was just the cut. The infection removal would take longer, and I was ready. The week after the gala felt like coming down from a war fought in silence. No bullets, no bodies, just collateral reputations and contracts torn at the seams. The press had already moved on to newer scandals. My father's firm issued a vague statement about misaligned processes, and my mother canceled her lecture circuit for rest. No apologies, just the soft dissolution of lies under better PR. Camille and I sat on the floor of our office, surrounded by folders, flash drives, legal pads filled with red ink. The war room looked quiet now. Still, but the tension lingered like the buzz of a power line. She leaned her head against the filing cabinet. You know, she said, we could still take it further. I stared out the window. Snowflakes drifted down in slow spirals. We could, I said, but I don't want to win that way. She looked at me for a long second, reading the tone shift. Tell me. I turned from the window. I don't want to just end something. I want to build something better, without their names on it, without the poison. I'm not trying to destroy a legacy. I'm trying to outgrow it. Camille smiled, small, sad, and proud all at once. That's what makes you dangerous, she said. You don't just burn things, you bury them, and then you bloom. I left New York 2 days later, without telling anyone where I was going. No press release, no final interview, just a one-way ticket to Northern California and a rental car that smelled like pine and old radio static. I rented a small cabin near Mendocino. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just trees. I slept for 2 days. I woke up sweating from dreams I couldn't remember. I walked through wet fields until my feet went numb. On the 3rd night, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank document for almost an hour. Then, I typed 3 words. Begin again here. The next few weeks were quiet in the loudest way. No inbox, no lawsuits, no camera flashes or boardrooms. I filled notebooks with frameworks, ideas, principles. Not for a company, for a kind of community. A support system for women, especially daughters, who had been quietly sabotaged by the very people who claimed to love them. I wanted to create something that wasn't built out of anger, but out of knowledge. Not war, not revenge, just clarity. Camille flew in mid-February. She brought donuts, a fresh hard drive, and two sealed envelopes. One was from a venture capital group in Seattle, offering a quiet $3 seed round with no strings and no press. The other was from my mother. I opened the investor letter first. Then I held the second one for hours without opening it. Camille finally said, "You don't have to read it. Some endings don't need punctuation." I nodded. But that night, I read it anyway. The letter was handwritten. Her script was still sharp, angular, like someone who refused to round off the corners of anything, even words. She didn't apologize, not really. But she said, "You were right. I was afraid of you becoming something I couldn't control." And for once it didn't hurt, because I finally understood something she never could. Love isn't ownership, and control isn't legacy. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't tear it, didn't burn it, just slid it into a drawer I didn't open again. Camille asked me the next morning what I planned to do with the funding. I told her I wanted to create a foundation, not for women in tech, for women erased by family narratives. She laughed. "You're going to build an empire off what they tried to make you ashamed of." "No," I said. "I'm going to build a sanctuary out of it." The day I filed the nonprofit's registration, I wore the same black jumpsuit I had worn at the gala. Not for power, for memory, because I wanted to remember that no matter what I built now, it would be mine. No borrowed bloodlines, no curated image, no silence wrapped in diamonds. Mine. 2 weeks later, I received a text from Jace. It was short. "I saw what you did. I think I'm ready to talk." I didn't reply right away, because I had learned the difference between a door and a wound. And some things should only be opened if you're ready to carry what's inside. The first time I stepped onto a stage after everything, it wasn't for a product launch or a keynote. It was in the back room of a renovated factory in Detroit, standing in front of 40 folding chairs and 3 broken microphones. No cameras, no glamour, just women. Most of them tired. A few of them afraid. One had a bruised wrist she didn't try to hide. One kept glancing at the door, like someone might come in and drag her out. Another held her daughter in her lap, a little girl with a stuffed rabbit missing an eye. It wasn't what I had envisioned when I'd set out to build something, but in that room, I understood something essential. The fight was never about boardrooms. It was about the right to own your voice, especially after someone you loved tried to take it away. I didn't come in with a speech. I just said what I knew to be true. Most of us were told to shrink so someone else could grow. What they never taught us is how much we remember while we're small. Silence. Then someone said, "Yeah." Then another whispered, "That's me." And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was building alone. The foundation grew faster than I expected. Not because I marketed it, because women found each other. Camille set up encrypted forms and open legal consult hours. Former donors from my parents' circles defected quietly, offering small grants under different names. We partnered with housing programs, startup incubators, trauma recovery teams. The name of the organization? The Quiet Rebellion. No photos, no press kits, just results. By summer, I was getting emails from women I'd never met, telling me how their fathers used their college funds to bail out cousins, how their mothers erased them from family photos to make room for sons, how they left weddings, courtrooms, companies, homes, alone, and wondered if they were the problem. I read every email. One night, Camille found me sitting in the office past midnight, eyes bloodshot. "You okay?" she asked. I held up my phone. "This one's from a girl in Tulsa. Her uncle took her invention, pitched it to a startup, and told her she should be grateful he believed in her enough to steal it." Camille exhaled. "There's so many." "There always were," I said. "We just didn't know where to send the pain." 3 weeks later, I got a message request from someone I hadn't seen in 8 years. "I think I owe you a thank you. Can we talk?" Her name was Marla, my cousin, the one our family always joked about behind her back. Dropped out of college, got pregnant by a guy who disappeared, took a job managing a cash register while everyone else climbed corporate ladders. I hadn't spoken to her since I left home. When we met at a coffee shop in Phoenix, she didn't look apologetic. She looked certain. "I've been following the quiet rebellion," she said. "Didn't know it was you until last week." I waited. She continued. "I read something on the site about being erased without anyone raising their voice. It made me cry, because I thought that only happened to me." "It didn't," I said. "They just taught us to keep it quiet." Her voice cracked. "You didn't." "No, but I almost did." That moment with Marla changed something in me. Until then, I thought I was building a foundation. But I realized I was rebuilding a family. Not by blood, but by bond. By truth. By survival. Camille and I flew back to New York a week later to prep for our next phase. Not just support, but storytelling. We set up a media studio, secured partnerships with a non-profit documentary company, and greenlit a series called We Were There Too. First-person accounts of women who were written out of their own narratives and chose to write themselves back in. The first episode launched with no promotion, and within 48 hours, it had over 3 million views. I got another message that night. This one from Jace. "I watched the documentary. I think Mom did too. She called me crying." I read it 3 times. Then I typed, "She cried because she got caught. I cried because I got free." But I didn't send it. Not yet. Instead, I replied, "Did she say anything about me?" A pause. Then, "She said you scare her. Because you didn't just walk away. You made it matter." I stood alone that evening in our new office, looking out at the city skyline. The same lights I once saw from a private jet, wondering if I'd ever matter to the people who gave me their name. Now I stood in a space I built with my own hands, my own pain, and said out loud, "They're not my legacy. I am." 6 months passed before I went back to the house. Not the foundation's office, not my loft in Tribeca. The house. The one I grew up in, where I learned to color inside lines I didn't draw, where ambition was celebrated, as long as it wasn't mine. It looked smaller than I remembered. Colder. The front door had a new security camera, but the cracked flagstone path was the same. I stood on the porch for almost 5 minutes before knocking. Jace answered. He didn't look surprised. "She's in the garden," he said. I stepped past him without a word. Every step felt heavier than it should have. The floorboards groaned in familiar tones. I could hear the low hum of classical music from the sitting room. The smell of lemon polish and carefully hidden disapproval still clung to the air. She was kneeling beside a planter box, trimming dead leaves from a row of hydrangeas. "Hi, Mom." She didn't look up. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said, voice steady. "I wasn't either." A pause. Then she rose slowly, wiped her hands on her apron. "I saw the new series. I watched every episode." I didn't say anything. Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for a garden fork. I didn't know how many ways a person could say, "I never felt safe with my family," until I heard it 30 times in different voices. My throat tightened. Not from grief, not even from resentment. Just the old, familiar ache of wanting someone to say what they never could. "You don't have to pretend you didn't know," I said. She nodded. "I knew, I just didn't want it to be true. You were inconvenient." That's the word I used in my head. "You always asked questions that made rooms go quiet." I blinked. "That's the most honest thing you've ever said to me." And I wish it weren't. We sat in the garden for a long time, not talking, just breathing. At one point, she said, "Do you hate me?" I looked at her. Pale green eyes. Same ones I'd seen in mirrors, interviews, legal battles. "I think for a while I did," I said. "But hate is exhausting, and I have better things to build now." She looked down at the soil. "You did more with the pain than I ever thought possible. That's the difference between us. You buried it to forget. I buried it so something else could grow." I didn't stay long. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't offer it. Sometimes closure isn't a door closing. It's you deciding not to walk back through it. That fall, the Quiet Rebellion launched its largest initiative yet, the Reclaim Registry, a network of lawyers, mental health counselors, and mentors for women seeking legal detachment from toxic family contracts, estate pressure, or forced dependency. It went viral in 3 days. The emails started pouring in. One line repeated across hundreds of them. I thought I was alone. I was on stage again in Chicago, this time at a sold-out women's leadership summit. Thousands of faces in the dark. I stood beneath hot lights, a single spotlight narrowing the world to one space. My pulse was calm, my voice steady. I used to think silence was strength, that if I could survive without telling anyone how much it hurt, I'd win. I paused. But survival is not the same as healing, and silence isn't strength. It's a wound dressed as wisdom. Scattered applause. I was erased in rooms that served my family's image. I lost years to trying to be easier to love. But here's the truth. If someone only loves the version of you that makes them comfortable, they don't love you. They love control. The crowd went still. I finished quietly. Find the people who don't ask you to shrink. Build your own table if you're not welcome at theirs. And never, ever apologize for outgrowing what was designed to contain you. Backstage, a girl approached me. Maybe 20. Nervous. She didn't say anything at first, just handed me a note. It read, "Thank you. I stopped calling my mother after she told me I ruined her life by being born. I thought I was being cruel. Now I know I was being free." I folded the note and looked at her. "You're not cruel," I said. "You're conscious." That night, I stood on my hotel balcony overlooking the city. The skyline pulsed like a heartbeat, thousands of stories being lived in parallel. I thought about the little girl I used to be, the one who tried so hard to belong in a family that resented her light. And I whispered into the air, "You made it." Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time in my life, I knew exactly where I stood. If this story felt like yours in any way, even in small echoes, you're not alone. Just thought you should know that. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the hardest part isn't walking away from the people who hurt you. It's learning to walk toward the version of yourself they tried to silence. I didn't just lose a family. I lost the illusion that I had to earn their love. And once I let go of that, I found peace, power, and a purpose that no one could take. Maybe you've been there. Maybe you're there now. So let me ask you, what did you have to leave behind in order to become who you are today? What silence are you finally ready to break? If this story touched something in you, let me know where you're watching from, or just drop a line in the comments. And hey, if this video made you feel seen, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next one. I've got more stories to tell. Maybe one of them will be yours.